A little bit of vulnerability confusion leads to a big print nightmare.
Matt, I understand you have a story on another Microsoft bug.
This one is a particular bug of interest for the last week or so called PrintNightmare. And to do it justice, I actually have to go back a few weeks to a previous bug and explain from there. So let's start with CVE 2021-1675. I know you guys get real excited when I rattle off numbers like that. This was a print spooler bug in Windows. So print spooler is part of the operating system that handles print jobs. That's the short version. A group of researchers from Tencent, Affine, and NS Focus submitted this bug in the print spooler that could be used for privilege escalation on a Windows box. Cool. Everybody seemed pretty good with that. Later, some researchers from a company called Sang4 published that they had found that this bug could be used for not just privilege escalation, but remote code execution. However, what they had found, the folks from Sang4, turned out to be a totally different bug, which we know now as CVE 2021-34527, or PrintNightmare. And it's this miscommunication or misunderstanding of what bug they're actually dealing with that leads us down an interesting road. So this is PrintNightmare. Affects all the versions of Windows and not just domain controllers as was previously believed. So Tuesday, Microsoft issues an out-of-band patch for this bug. This doesn't just happen all the time. Out-of-band usually means Microsoft is taking it very seriously because someone has just said, hey, we think we found remote code execution in your operating system. So they didn't wait for the regular patch Tuesday. They pushed it out as soon as they could. Now, this was a bug fix intended for domain controllers and Windows 10 devices. At the same time, Sang4 had posted some proof of concept code under the impression this was the vulnerability that had already been fixed. Turns out that's not the case. Within 12 hours, Mimikatz author Benjamin Delpy, and folks who pay attention to the show probably have heard of Mimikatz, very popular tool for attacking Windows. Benjamin Delpy showed this was still a working bug and that it works on more machines than previously thought. So Sang4 pulled their proof of concept code off the internet, but not before other folks got a look at it, and there are at least 3 other proof of concepts of this bug out in the wild, and it's being actively exploited. So because of that misunderstanding of what bug had been patched and the release of proof of concept code for a bug that technically hadn't been patched, now this is being attacked in the wild. Kind of interesting. So the vulnerability is in the print spooler or spoolsv.exe. And one of the key features that allows this PrintNightmare to work is point and print, which is where a printer kind of provides its own drivers to a Windows host. If you ever tried to connect to a printer and it actually gave you back drivers and said, hey, you should install this, this is the feature we're talking about. And the host can install these drivers for printers, even if the user is not admin in a very specific situation. Don't you love it when these things always become very specific? So if you're worried about this bug, what can you do? So make sure you've got the latest patches from Microsoft and ensure that the registry keys that they mention on the write-up for the patch do not exist on your box or are set properly. And the good thing about this is that these settings on most Windows 10 and Windows Server machines don't exist. You would have had to explicitly set them yourself, or something else that you installed would have had to set them in order for them to exist. So for most people, this is not going to be a problem, but it is worth checking to understand how it's set on your system. If you can't make those changes for some reason, turn off the print spooler or make it so only admins can install printer drivers, which seems sane in a business environment in the first place.
Matt, I got a quick question. When you had made mention that 2 sets of researchers were talking about the print spooler, were you able to tell, or was it something that was just a breakdown in communication, the way they were describing what these bugs were, that made the other researcher believe it was the same bug that they were talking about? Was there anything out there that discussed how that happened?
I'm not sure of the details, and I probably could do a little more research into the time frame in which Sang4 posted their remote code execution version of this bug, but I do not have the details on that. All I know is that the first team reported this bug under a certain CVE, saying that it was for privilege escalation on a host, and then the Sang4 folks posted their code and said, "Hey, turns out it's also useful for this other thing." Um, and then Microsoft said, "Actually, that's not the same bug." Um, I recommend anybody who's interested in that take a look at the Ars Technica article on it. Very good. And take a look at the Microsoft blog posts. Honestly, if you start looking around, I believe there's, man, I wish I had the link for it. There was a very good GitHub write-up and wrap-up of this whole situation. Not GitHub as in, the organization, but somebody posted on GitHub like a guide to this bug. And I'll see if I can't find a link to that.
One of the other things that I noticed, obviously, is that it's printing. It was printing remotely. You'd have to have this printing, exposed to the internet. And I was just thinking about, how often, which companies who don't need to do that, but that we're all working in this remote world, and that didn't seem like a great pathway but somehow kind of making sure that that's not open beyond where it needs to be. I was just thinking about that also.
That's
if
true.
Your company, if people don't need to print remotely, this is another way you could kind of make sure that you wouldn't be exposed. I think, right, Matt? I think that was one thing.
Yes, that's absolutely true. So, obviously we should talk about how this bug might get exploited. It is over the network. So if this is internet facing, I cannot think of a single reason why you'd want to expose the print spooler over the internet directly. If that was really something you needed as a company, put it behind some sort of VPN, require users to authenticate to that before they hit the network services. And even inside of your own network, because we know that there's the print spooler, the first print spooler bug allowed for privilege escalation. Now this one allows for remote code execution. In your own network, you should be reevaluating, does the server that the print spooler is active on actually need to do anything related to printing? If it's not an actual print server, most Windows boxes might not even need this. So understanding where it needs to be running is a great way to mitigate some of the damage. Even if you can't print, minimize the number of machines that are actually running the service.